assuming that most of you have been following along in Psalm 91, and we're going to tackle today, we're going to look at verse 14. Assuming you've been following along, and a quick review for those who have not. I've said the psalm appears to have three groups of people being spoken of. That beginning Psalm 91 and verse 1, and let's put 2 here, are you and me. That's us, or we. All right? The second group we've discussed, that I've called them the angelic host, from verses 3 all the way to 13, that are addressing and speaking to us, telling us what exactly it is that we are benefiting from this wonderful psalm. And then that last portion, which is verses 14 through 16, which I've said, that's God. God begins to speak. And I'd like you to just take notice as I've described this as three persons, not necessarily having a discussion with each other. I'd have you to notice something, that King James did something quite right, because he hath set his love upon me. I want you to notice that God is not actually speaking directly to us. It's as if we are voyeuristically listening to what God is telling the angels about us. Because what God is now communicating through these verses, he's actually speaking to this angelic host, telling the angelic host, because. So I would like, first of all, for us to kind of take note of that. The discussion is not being pointed. God is not directly speaking to us in this psalm, but to the angelic host. And because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. The beautiful thing about this is I've brought some versions of what is commonly, I think every single English translation has some unique problems to it. The King James is a little bit disappointing because he has said his love, and I think when people read, English readers specifically will read the word love and they say, well, I know what love is, and do you? Or do I? In fact, before I go any further, let me just say this, that if we were looking at the Greek in the New Testament, there are 2 words that are most commonly used through the Greek New Testament to speak and convey love. 2 words, one of them, agape, or agapao, and the other one is phileo. The first one, agape, we often have said is God's unconditional love, no strings attached. And the second one, phileo, is where we get brotherly kind of love. I do for you, you do for me. It's an exchange. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, phileo, all right? So you get an understanding of these words, and you can see that the Greek does not really give, there are a few other ones, but these are the primary words of the New Testament. And one of the things I often think about, it's the most quoted New Testament passage by all evangelicals, John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And then nobody stops to think about what that so loved means. So agaped. And I want you to just think about this, because I'm going to define this for you, and then we're going to look at our passage and what love will mean to us through the Psalms. So, from this framework, God gave to man, in the New Testament realm, God gave to man something that man needed, he did not necessarily want. And God saw the need, not the want of man, in giving him his only begotten Son to die on a cross, to give us forgiveness of sins, and to restore and reconcile us to God. Now, that love, agape, in the Greek, must be understood as no strings attached. It means that when God sent his only begotten Son, There was no strings attached. If Jesus went to the cross, died, and rose, and there was only but one that would be saved, that's God's problem. He didn't put a qualifier on it. He sent his son to reverse what Adam did at the first. The first family blueprinted sin on humankind without the possibility of ever entering into God's eternal presence as we were destined to be. So, in the concept of this Greek word for love, agape, remember it is uncalculated, no strings attached. And don't, please, reduce these words because the English translates and uses one word, love. We think as English readers and speakers, we reduce it down to our language frame, and we fail to penetrate the very essence of what God's word is communicating. Now, in the Old Testament, you'd be surprised, this is going to shock you. In the Old Testament, there are probably at least 10 words that convey love. And each one of them carries a nuance of something. The most common word for love in the Old Testament, and I will write it phonetically for you without writing too much Hebrew, looks like this. And it's the usual word for a normal love, love of anything, setting the mind on something, to adore it, to just a normal type of love. There are words in the Hebrew for inordinate and inappropriate love. Yes, even the Hebrew thinkers had that in mind. Greek has eros. We get our word erotic. Hebrew actually has a counterpart, if you can believe that. Because it's the language of God. God wouldn't deign to have one of those in his vocabulary, right? But there are different words. There is a word for love out of Psalm 18. The beginning of Psalm 18 says, I will love thee, O Lord. And that word carries with it and conveys the sense of a child in gestation in the mother's womb, to be wombed by God, to be birthed by God. We would bring that into the New Testament as conveying the concept of being born again. And there are many different pictures. The one I want you to focus on today, it is in our psalm, is a word, and I'll write it phonetically for you, chasak. Not to be confused with another word that we've used here many times. I'll write it for you Hebrew followers. Chasak, yes, I know. So, 3 letters, chasak. What this word entails is so profound that unless we grab hold of the real essence of the word, we'll just have what the English does, which is love. And love is quite beautiful, but the power of this word is quite suggestive. So, for you who would like to know this word, chasak, it is, first definition, to cling to, to cleave. Now, sometimes this word has been used in the Old Testament once or twice. Once, I stand corrected. It's used once of a man who is clinging desperately with his eyeballs, not the body yet, to a woman. That's the only time it's used like that. But most of the time, the expression is something so woven together that it surpasses just the concept of merely being joined or association. So to best understand our psalm, you've got to almost understand the essence of this word, chasak. To cling, to cleave, to attach. And in fact, one of the great Bible dictionaries gives a description of this word as putting on a saddle, the girth portion, onto a donkey or a horse. If you've ever done that, you know that while you're sitting on a horse, you can tighten up the girth so it's nice and tight while you're on the horse. And the horse will usually go and breathe out and expand the rib cage so that you can barely get anything else in there. But you want it to be nice and tight so it doesn't move while you're going along. Think of that imagery because it's that type of clinging. It's so tight, the contact must be there to understand this word love. Now, our King James says, because he has set his love upon me, I brought a few examples of other English translations because you know me, I'm constantly going and picking for words. So this one actually does something different. We'll save that. We have the James Moffat, or as I say, Moffat Bible. And this is how they translate verse 14. He clings to me, so I deliver him. I set him safe because he cares for me. Now, that word cling it's a good word. Next, we'll go to Revised Standard Version. And some of you say, why do you do this? Because this is the way you make the Bible come alive. This is the way you put flesh and blood on things. To understand that mere men, mere mortals, translated these words, and we lack the ability to convey with our vocabulary sometimes the essence of things that are being communicated here. So keep that in the back of your mind. This is not a linguistics course. Revised Standard Version says, because he cleaves to me, I will deliver him, I will protect him, because he knows my name. And the Jerusalem Bible, since he clings to me, I rescue him. I raise him high since he acknowledges my name. He calls to me and I answer him. So you get the picture that our word being translated in the King James, love, lacks intensity, all right? Now, what I had to do was I had to dig a little bit. And I had to dig to find something that would, one, capture the truest concept. So I went to the best and oldest extant, most complete Latin Vulgate. We have a copy. It's multiple volumes of the, I always mess this up, Amiatinus, which is multiple volumes, originally thought to come from Italy, but sorry, friends, it did not. It actually has its origins in Northumbria, England, from about maybe 698 AD. That translation, and I'll write in a different color for you, that translation of the Latin helps to understand the word we're looking at here, Hebrew, chasak. Latin says, koniam mihi adhesit. Koniam, because or since. Me, and in the dative case, so to me, adhesit. We get our word, this Latin word adhesit, we get our English word for adhere or adhesive. So when you think of this word chasak, I also want you to keep and bring to your mind what adhesive tape does. It sticks. If it's good tape, it sticks. Keeps things in place. It binds things. And I really want you to kind of get that really grooved into your mind, that this type of love, and this, for me, is probably the most important of all the messages through Psalm 91, is probably the single most important word that we're going to look at. If we understand what this clinging, cleaving word means to us as believers, God delights in this. And what I think God does not delight in is what is clearly mentioned in the New Testament. They came to Jesus and they said, Lord, Lord, didn't we do wonderful things in your name? Didn't we cast out demons in your name? Jesus says, depart from me, I never knew you. Now I want you, it's very, very subtle, but I want you to think about this. How do you get to know a person and therefore begin to cling to them and to cleave to them? You begin to get to know someone by their name. Get to know someone by their name. Hi, Christopher. Go down the road here. Name everybody in the church. But you get to know people by their name. Right, John? Right, see? And from that first contact, a relationship, if it does develop, and I'm talking about two people relating, begins with knowing the person's name on the surface, and then underneath, beginning to know how that person is, their behavior, their likes, their dislikes, their habit patterns, how they drive or how they eat. No, I don't want to know about that. My point is, in getting to know someone, a relationship is being built and fortified. Now, we're talking about our relationship to God, but I'm bringing it down to where we live. You get to know someone, and we would first say we begin to love people in the New Testament frame of phileo, a quid pro quo. I do for you, you do for me. And it may grow, and it may become an agape type of love, but only God can give us this when he puts his nature in us. And therefore, going back into this Old Testament frame, this is something that can only come, this chasa can only come by getting to know God, relating to him. Let me read it again, because there's an order to something here. Going back to the King James, which now seems quite mild, because he has set his love upon me. Kind of mild, isn't it? As opposed to clinging and cleaving and holding on tight. This could just be a, hey, God, I love you. Let's do lunch. Could be that type of love. Never mind. Because he has set his love upon me, because he clings to me, he cleaves to me, therefore I will deliver him. I will set him on high because he hath known my name. I want you to see the order. He, us, that is we, he has set his love, he clings, and because he hath known my name comes last. A lot of people in Christianity have this the wrong way. They want to start with the love factor on the surface, and then we progress. We understand through the psalm that verse 2 made God our fortress. The declaration of our mouth said, my God, in him will I trust. Therefore, remember I said to you, this psalm is not for everybody. This psalm is for people who are ready to put their entire being in God's hands. Why is it we can call an insurance company and we see the logo and we say, oh yeah, good hands. We can't see the good hands of God, yet we're not ready to put ourselves in his hands. Think about that. And then think about this invisible relationship. How can you cling to someone you can't see? Very easily. You begin to walk in his word. And the more you walk in his word, the more you get to know who God is. He reveals himself to us through his word. And remarkably, this is what I think is the pivotal thing for this message today. Remarkably, without understanding Latin or Hebrew, but the principle of this attachment which surpasses simply an initial frame of reference, like the Philippian jailer crying out, what must I do to be saved? The Philippian jailer didn't have a long history revealed in the book. We only know that he saw the doors of the prison open and cried out, what must I do to be saved? And I guarantee you, thereafterwards, he began this walking relationship, a beginning point where you begin to learn about God's ways and you begin to know him. Now, let me ask you, how can you have a relationship and cleave to somebody you don't know? And that's 90% of Christianity. And if I've insulted some people, I don't apologize. That's 90% of Christianity. Does not know the Heavenly Father they serve. Does not know when they talk about and say, Jesus is Lord. That means complete mastery over me. Nothing less than that counts. Friends, next time you see somebody telling you they've accepted and decided to follow because they said Jesus is Lord, I'd like you to just stop for a minute. Don't say anything. For years and years, I've fought these people trying to tell them, Jesus Christ is not Lord until you submit to his will. He is not Lord of your life until you decide, and you do. Your way doesn't work. And then that's the decision. Once that's clear, you find something really radical. That most of Christianity is enamored with what God will do for your daily life, except the most needful thing to have a relationship, a connection beyond. If I asked you in this room, your relationship with any one person in your whole lifetime that failed because you leaned on them, you were leaning on a person, trusting and believing they would be there for you. Show me hands. How many have done that? And yet, you're still here believing God's going to help you out and take care of you? I'm trying to say this type of love, this type of clinging love to God says, I won't let go no matter what. God's going to have to get some unstickification with me, because as far as I'm concerned, everything else that I have latched onto in my life, and I speak for myself, has always come undone. That's why the Bible says, know no man after the flesh. You could take that to mean anything you want, but in the framework of trusting God, until you are trusting Him completely, clinging to Him, taking Him, and saying, I will not let go, I cling to Him. I adhere from God's vantage point. Remember, God, underneath here, this circle, God is talking to the angelic host, telling the angelic host, because he or she has been clinging to me, cleaving to me. And this is the wonder. When I saw this in the Hebrew, I thought, only God could have such a great sense of humor. I feel sorry for English readers. They can't see this. Our cleaving or clinging to God, this word right here is a verb, and it is in the call, which is just a simple action. But it's in the perfect. And I tried to describe this to you to make this simple grammar, so you don't get a big grammar lesson today. We save that for during the week. Perfect in the Hebrew, God is looking on as if He sees the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. He is describing this event as an onlooker. Therefore, it's perfect. If I'm in the mix and it's happening to me, I'm inside, it's imperfect. It's not yet finished. But God, who is on the outside, talking to these angelic hosts, He sees it in a simple action that's perfect. And He says, because He clings to me. Now, what God does, that gets God's attention. God makes a staggering cluster of promises here. I want you to just see them. I will deliver him. I will set him on high. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. There's at least 6 pivotal promises in there. Maybe 7 for us to grab hold of. But they're promises that God says He'll do automatically for the one clinging to God. Now, this isn't like, I do this, so then God does that. God sees the heart. I don't. But God sees the heart that is clinging, that is attached. God sees that, and that delights Him. And because that delights Him, therefore, and I'm telling you the rest now, the promises I've just read. Furthermore, how many of you have heard the expression in the evangelical world? People say, you must confess Jesus. Because of a lack of language communication, and because people are pleasantly pleased to not bother themselves to know that the New Testament was not written in English, but in Greek, and the Old Testament in Hebrew. That word for confessing Jesus comes from a passage in our text. The root of it is to know, not to confess as in a penitent like Psalm 51, but a proclamation or a declaration that can only come by gnosis. And it's revealed right here. In fact, I could take this one verse verse 14. And if I could stretch it apart, I would show you the New Testament is right there. The New Testament is right in those verses. And the understanding of what pleases God is not the performance of acts and rituals and bowing down at shrines or doing good works, but clinging to Him. Lord, no matter what happens, I am going to trust you. Do we cling to God in our thoughts? Do we cling to God in our love? And do we cling to God in our contact with His will? These are the most important questions. I hate to tell you, they may seem quite trivial for some sitting here, but they're the most important questions that you will ever ask yourself privately and quietly. Am I clinging to God, or am I clinging to something else? You've almost got to sit down, and I've said this, kind of take a spiritual inventory. What do I cling to? I've shared with you the hardest decision that some people have to make is whether they will follow God knowing the path is uncertain, or whether they will stay in their comfort zone. Now for me, you've heard the story many times, I made that decision many, many years ago with an ultimatum put to me from the vantage point of I either decided that I would stay, even though I was not in the Catholic Church, I would stay a part of the Catholic Church, familial perhaps attachment. But if I ventured outside and left, that was it. And I decided, I heard a message, a radical message. The speaker mentioned that you might think of Jesus, if you think of Jesus on the order of a poached egg, quoting C.S. Lewis. And I thought, that's it. The proof of Jesus Christ resurrected changed my life, changed my direction, and suddenly the desire to acquire knowledge about who is this God. I lived in the land of relics. I lived in the land of bowing down and crossing myself. I lived in the land of acolytes and anything else you want to build upon, but none of that. That may make you feel good on the surface and massage your visual stimulus to be able to say, this looks holy. But the holiest thing you will ever do is strip every concept from ceremonialism and get to the point where you are clinging. You are so attached to God because you have come to know through His Word what type of a God He is. When you get to know a person, when we say just of people, that's the way he is, that's the way she is. Well, this is the way my God is. He's never lied. He's never said or given a promise that He didn't make good on. He's never called anyone that He's refused. That may bust a couple of bubbles in some churches. Let's take the whole Latin deal. Let's see what else the Latin has to say. Quoniam mihi adhesit e liberaro ium. This is going to be fun to read now. I can't see where I'm going. Exaltabo ium quoniam. This does look like a Scott board now. Cognovit nomen meum. Because to me, He adheses Himself, He clings to me, and that's you and me. God is speaking of us. And this is actually interesting. It should be and I, but it's in the Word. And I'm going to make a correction from another text, which is liberabo, which is the future. This is future anterior. It should be future. I will free him. Now, I want you to see the subtlety of this. Because he clings to me, because he will not let go. Again, rightly so, I would ask you to just pay attention to something very subtle. Look in your psalm. Please look at verse 3, where it says, He shall deliver. You see that word right there? And then we'll just keep reading on. There's 2 or 3 deliverers. He shall deliver, verse 3. Let me go backwards. In verse 15, I will deliver him. And there's one more deliver somewhere in here. I know I counted them. There's actually 3. So I missed one. But they're all being translated by different Hebrew words, all meaning something subtly different. All right. So what I'm trying to tell you is it's rather interesting that as we're translating the Latin, I see something more interesting than just what the English does in saying, I will deliver him. I will liberate him. I will free him. Of course, there's many types of deliverance in this psalm. I'd like you to get the idea, and I took down some notes from one of the legal journals that I have in my possession. If you were reading a legal document for the Latin speaker, liberabo actually, or liberaro, you would find the first thing in a legal realm, in a Roman frame, would be manumission, or freedom of slaves. I want you to see this. It's beautiful. Because he clings to me, because he adheres to me, because he won't let go, there's a paradox. I will free him. I will liberate him. You know, the beauty of this book is it has so many different pictures for us of God freeing us, delivering the children out of Egypt's bondage, delivering them from slavery, but they became willing slaves to God. And there's a big difference between slavery that is coerced and forced and negatively impacted, such as our history in this country represents, or the slavery that the Bible speaks of, where someone willingly gives themselves wholeheartedly to servitude, and paradoxically they become free because they are a willing servant. The Latin captures that. Because he clings to me, I will liberate him, I will free him. Him. Wow, I thought all of a sudden my Latin is English, but it's not. All right. Exaltabo, I will exalt him. I will exalt him. Exaltabo, him. Because, cognovit, because, I want you to see this one word. Cognovit. We get our English word for cognizance, cognitive function, recognition. Those are all from that Latin word. And interestingly enough, and I won't bore you with it, but in this wonderful Latin dictionary, I just happen to have it, there's a beautiful tapestry of words in here attached to this cognate. They're cognates of that word, they're relatives, and one of them has a cognate word that says related by family, by birth. One of those Latin words, which we'll go into during the week, I'd like to share with you, but cognitively, just on the surface, we must understand does not simply mean, yeah, I know where Forest Lawn is. It means you have to know how to get there. You have to have some frame of reference. You see, we read again, because he hath known my name. And know in English, K-N-O-W-N, known, but know, does not even convey the depth of the Latin or the Hebrew that we'll look at, or just the basic principle. It is much more. It is infinitely more than just a superficial knowledge over here. When you begin to get to know the name of God, who he is, you don't have to go very far. I wrote down out of Psalm 91, I wrote all the names of God and how I relate to them through the Word and in my life. Elyon, Most High God. Shaddai, provider of substance, the enough God. Elohi, the creator of heaven and earth. They're all in this psalm. I mean, when people talk about how do you get to know God, begin by getting to know what he said and how he revealed himself. Furthermore, let's take this a little step further here. Furthermore, because he hath known my name, not just any name, but God is speaking, my name. Now let's put some flesh and blood on this, because I think you're going to like this. I'm going to try and do Hebrew without doing a big lesson here. If you will, I'm going to make sure I'm giving you the right directions here. Need to make sure of that. All right, if you will, circle two words in your King James. The word that is being translated deliver, and a cluster of words, set him on high. Those two statements of God are much more than they appear. They're not just a simple action. You who are studying Hebrew now know why I'm going to say this. Conjugation of verbs, these two structures I just gave you are in a form called the PL. That is an intensive act. It's not just, I'll give you an example. I broke the cup is a simple act, but I smashed it into pieces is PL, intensive. When God says, I will deliver him, it's not just deliver, it's an intensive concept. You've got to get behind the language and understand being delivered and being set on high. I love the fact that this being set free, being liberated, being, by the way, liberado is also to be free in legal terms and released of a debt. Then I think God knew what he was doing when he created this crazy Hebrew language, because those intense words not only give me the confidence that God is intensively doing something to me and for me that I don't deserve, but he is not doing it by some remote control. Intensively delivering. In fact, take this word to a new level. If the word, which we will eventually look at in the Hebrew, is to deliver, being translated to deliver, think about what good is to be delivered if you're not released for something. What good would it be? I see this all the time. Men that are released from penitentiary after serving 20 or 25 years. They get a state jumpsuit, 20, 30 bucks are left in their pocket. What good is it if you have nowhere to go? I'm free, hoo-hoo! I'm free to go nowhere. I got no money, I got no clothes. Wearing this stupid jumpsuit marked Department of Corrections on the back. No one's going to give me a ride anywhere. Woohoo! I'm free to go nowhere. Or would you rather be intensively delivered? That is not only, take that same example. God gives you the new clothes, and I'm not talking about these. He gives you a new heart, and he gives you a new direction, and he gives you that absolute release from every debt you've incurred along the way, that every single debt, and I speak of those that would require payment, sins committed, wipes it clean. Now we're talking about God I know and love here in the book. Not only that, knowing his name. And I think if I were to pinpoint one place in this whole entire concept outside of clinging to him, it would be knowing his name. Because once you begin to know God's name, you begin to know his revelation of who he is. We read in the scriptures where it talks about God healing the people. We read that and we say, oh yes, I know. It says, I'm the Lord that healeth thee. But God is a healing kind of God. Follow Jesus through the pages of the New Testament when people were sick. He didn't say, hey, there's a good doc down the street. If you need some healing, there's a doctor down the road. He healed them all. He healed them as he went. So God revealed all of those names encompassed in Christ as he walked the streets, and still is revealing that same loving God to us today. You find eventually when people talk about a need and provision, you will never know what God will do for you. And forgive me for using that verbiage, I say it cautiously, but you'll never know what God will do for you until you are ready to lay yourself down on the altar and say, God, truly to you I commit myself, my way, my problems, and my life. And I don't plan on getting up off the altar and walking away just yet. You watch God begin to work. I've never seen it be different. But I've met very few people, you may be an exception here in this room, but I've met very few people who are willing to just trust God completely and take him at his word. Wouldn't it be horrible to have your whole life relationship? You never believe me. You never take me at my word. You never trust me. What type of relationship do we have? Nothing. And worse than that is you keep putting me on trial. Well, what's she going to do this time? What's she going to do this time? You think she's actually going to, you two are talking together, husband and wife. You think she's really going to do something? I don't know. Do you think she's going to do something? At some point, just on a carnal level, I'm going to walk away. Hey, listen, there's other people that would like to be helped. Go help yourself. Now, thank God, God is not like that. But can you imagine this is what we do to God all day long and worse? We like to come to Him when it's so messed up. You know the hours. You know the moments. When it's so messed up that it would take a miracle to fix it. You want your kids to only come to you when they need something? Or because they really want to come to you? That's what I'm saying. You will never get beyond first base with God until you recognize beyond the surface there is some great revelation of the person of God in that book. And until you are ready to step into that realm and say, you know what? Up until now, I have treated God like He might, or it's possible. But now I'm going to step into the realm of actual faith. And faith is, I don't see it, but I'm going to jump over the precipice and believe that God, in faith, will be there to guide me, to lead me, to enable me, to heal me, to help me, to give me wisdom, whatever it is that is geared towards His will. Remember, I said, what are we clinging to? Our thoughts? How do we cling to Him? Our thoughts? Extremely important. You know, I bet you since I said the word important, your mind has gone elsewhere. And what have you thought of now, since I just said the last word? And that's how quickly the mind will go off somewhere. And if we do that while we're in this building, can you imagine what we do when we're not in this building? Woohoo! You know, I always think it's a wonder that we don't have more car wrecks and more disasters because people are so distracted. And there comes a time when you must discipline the mind and make a connection with God. And at that moment, you begin to drive out all the traffic and all the noise. And that connection point is time where time and eternity meet. I'm now reaching into the Word and I'm grabbing this promise. Not loving Him because I think He will do something back. He's already done something for me and for you that we could never even possibly repay. Forget about it. But rather, because He sees my heart and He sees your heart, God is saying, I'm going to reach down deep. I'm going to not just deliver you, I'm going to set you free. I'm not just going to, the Latin says exaltabo, not just exalt, but set intensively in a high place. In the moment that He does it, I want you to think about this, because that word in the Hebrew means to set on high, but intensively it means unapproachable. In other words, God is saying, I will not only set you free, but I'm going to put you in a place where you become untouchable. Now, does that mean all the time? It means as long as you're in the promise of verse 2. It means as long as you're saying, my God, please don't say, well, then that means that nothing can ever happen to me. Okay? You want to put that into practice? But rather, no matter what happens, God will be there because He sees my heart. From the Hebrew perspective, that's equally important because it is the language, after all, that this was done in. From the Hebrew perspective, I've already given you the framework without giving you all the language difficulties today, but I've already given you the framework for the two words in the English that read deliver and set on high. Not just a simple act, but intensive, beyond just our English words, magnified infinitely. Why? Because He knows my name. Now, at some point you're going to say, how do I make all this apply? Because what good is the message if you can't make it apply? Like Lord Chesterfield used to say, it's written in many diverse places, used to say, what good is a diamond like knowledge? Knowledge is like a diamond, rather. What good is it if it's not polished, or if it remains in a rough state? It can't be used or worn. Just keep it somewhere in safe keepings for naught. Likewise, these verses should make us begin to apply and understand there is a good reason why we are told when we begin to pray in Matthew 6, when Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, hallowed be thy name. It begins with the doorway of understanding who we are talking to, who we are relating to. The knowing that transcends really even our understanding. When Jesus walked the streets, do you think when people cried out and said, Son of David, that they actually knew beyond just crying out, Son of David, have mercy on me? But rather they had heard that he had done many wonderful things where he was coming from. They had heard of this Jesus, his capacity to heal, that he had healed others, that he had raised people from the dead. And when he passed by, they didn't just call out randomly all the names that are attached to Jesus, Rabbi, Master, Lord, including the one that's the most staggering. I love this. Poor Jews, they got the short end of the stick there at the crucifixion. They went to Pilate and said, after they're going to hang that sign in 3 languages, the titulus of Christ. And they said, no, don't put King of the Jews. Say, he thought he was King of the Jews, or he said he was King of the Jews. And Pilate said, too late. I love that. It's brilliant. Too late, it's already done. It says King of the Jews. Too late. You wanted to say he thought he was, or he said he was, but essentially he really wasn't. Pilate says, too late, it's already, what's done is done. Known as King of the Jews. But yet, if you think about it, he came to his own knowing who he was or rejecting him. So the name and knowing God and knowing and believing, let's just start there, are connected. I haven't even gotten to beyond belief, which is faith. Knowing and believing. Knowing something, the knowledge of something, and believing, which is only one part of activating the mind. And then at some point, you've got to put it into gear. You can know how to put the key in the ignition. You can know how to turn the key. You can know how to put the gas. But the only thing that's going to matter is when you put it in gear and you begin to go. Likewise, it's like that. So I can't make enough analogies and descriptions that at least at some point we begin to understand this is what gets God's attention. So I'm going to bring this to a close because I think for right now I've put up enough information regarding a concept I desperately want to get people to hear, which is this one word, ADHAESIT, chasak, clinging, cleaving, not letting go. This is what God sees. He also sees the superficial stuff. Remember, we went through the book in part of Malachi. And if you recall in Malachi, God's lament through the prophet is that the people were going through the rituals, but there was no heart in them. So I have a call today for you, especially for the ones that are kind of new to the church. I can't make you love God. I can't make you cling to God. But I can tell you the roadway, the path that leads there, usually consists of you or me, or let's say us, being brought to the point where we have nothing else to cling to. And it is at that moment when you are reduced down to that, you understand what your relationship with God should look like, not just in the moment of crisis, but through the rest of your walk. Now, isn't it a shame that we spend most of our time when we're in crisis? We will go to Him when everything else has failed. What gets God's attention is throughout this consistent relationship, the staying power of the faither. I said knowing, believing, then putting it into action, which is the faithing action that says, God said it, I know what God's going to do, so I'm just going to keep holding on until God makes His word come to pass. and I can't help but think about this. For this psalm containing so many promises, think back to what has already been promised to us. From the absolute danger that appears, from verse 3, deliverance from the snare of the fowler, the bait of the trapper, death, being covered with his feathers under his wings, being given that concept of his truth being an encompassing shield all around us, not being afraid of whatever happens in a 24-hour period, whether it be by day or by night at noon, and that God will let you see only with your eyes the reward of the wicked. Why? Because you have made this the house of God, not this building. That's why I reject the idea when people talk about, well, why do you have church here? Church is not here. We gather here. The church is the people. And most people who don't understand that will worship a building. They'll worship the glass and the steel, and they'll get down on their face and say, oh, could we build another better building? Watch the building fund go. You ask people to give because they've been taught in the Word, and they're, oh, well, gee, I may have to do something afterwards that I've been taught. But if you talk about building a building and putting something people can say, hey, I put my money there, you watch people come and they give. Some of those wonderful houses of God have fallen apart. If you're an Angelino, you know what I'm talking about. And you begin to see that the building itself, it'll all crumble, all of it. And by the way, who cares? Excuse me, I'd like the building to be, on the outside to be a little nicer, yeah. But considering the fact of how nice the inside is, I don't really care about the outside. What I care about are the people in the building. I care about the people who are in a seat listening and receiving something that is the words of life eternal. If you're interested, if you're at all interested, during the week, as we've been doing our Hebrew lessons together, I'll pick apart the Hebrew with you and show you all the verbs and everything, but I want you to leave here with a concept today. Something that is not just an idea that you say, that sounds good and it's a nice thought. Even from the most ambiguous sources, and I pulled from every source for this. I like even what the Syriac did. They said, for those who are seeking, remember the New Testament, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. It's like the Bible just confirms itself, but in this case, how much more sweet to know for those of us who have latched on. And yes, it is by gnosis, it is by experience, it is by little bit. You get to know God, you get to trust God, you start by little steps, and then suddenly you find, wow, I made it through that one. And if you're not careful, you think you delivered yourself. You'd be like those that didn't come back to give thanks. What I want to convey and what I want to impart to you today, that you might leave here with some crystal clear concept. God loves clingy people. You may not like them. But God loves clingy people that cling to him. He loves that. That gets his attention. If there was a adhesive concept available in heaven, it's all been fabricated down here by those that will not let go. So that is the concept I want you to leave here with. And the comfort that for that, now, there's many more promises. I only covered 2 of them. And those promises are so immense, it almost leaves me at the place of saying, how do you describe these things? The Hebrew has words for deliverance, many, many different words for deliverance. The Hebrew has words for setting on high. How do you describe these? Today, I'll only say this: intense. Not just a simple action. God doesn't just do something simple. He says intensively, not just a little bit, a whole lot. Get that picture today, and at least when you leave here today, know this: Your love for God and your tenacity to hang on will not go unseen. You may think God has not seen. Maybe you think God's ignoring you. I sometimes say that and then I repent. God does love you. And I'm telling you this much, this part of the promise, you want to see the other side of it? Turn to Psalm 9. I'll give you the other side of it. Psalm 9 and verse 10. It's like God has to keep repeating things. And they that know thy name will put their trust in thee, for thou, Lord, hast not forsaken them that seek thee. Take that to the bank of heaven with you. Take that with the knowledge that here is confirmed. There's many more places where this is confirmed, but they that know thy name will put their trust in thee, for thou, Lord, hast not forsaken them that seek thee. If you are not looking to find him, I can only say, Lord, help you. But if you're seeking, you don't have to go too far. The New Testament says, seek and ye shall find. Now, God is not lost, and he's not begging for friends, but he certainly does delight in us clinging to him with all of our heart and soul. I want you to get that concept and get it as one dimension today of a whole tapestry we'll weave together. So that when you do begin to read Jesus' commandment that you should love one another, when you read his commandment, this I give a new commandment, which is really not a new commandment, that you should love one another, you might begin to understand it is not the backslapping, sugary, pipey, yucky, gooey stuff that people are constantly doing. And the love to love one another begins in phileo. That's how we start. But when God has placed his nature in us, that agape nature brings forth unconditional, without strings, love that says, I love you no matter what. Hard for most people to even wrap their mind around. But in the meantime, for us to see, God's given us a way to approach him and says, if you'll just keep that way, I will deliver you. I will set you on high. I think we're going to have it to be continued. So if you want to know the rest of this and the rest of the amazing promises, you'll have to be here next week. That's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.